Good morning, everyone. My name is Briana Sedeno. Welcome to my capstone proposal, where I will talk about the importance of Kanaka ʻŌiwi storytelling. Oh, to get to know a little bit about me, I am a fourth year student at West Oahu, and I've transferred from Windward Community College back in 2022 with my AA. And I also graduated from Castle High School back in 2020. And as many of you might know, I'm a creative media student, but my concentration is in video game design and development. To kind of give a brief overlay, I'll be discussing my capstone project plans, as well as my thesis statement, and addressing the significance behind my proposed project and my rationale conducted in my research. Okay. First and foremost, my thesis statement is about with how much Hawaii is constantly used as this backdrop for television and dramas and movies. The storytelling of Hawaii and Kanaka ʻŌiwi in an entertainment perspective is more impactful and meaningful if written by Kanaka ʻŌiwi themselves. So with more often than not, how Hawaii is pictured in different dramas and stuff, there is always this portrayal of the tropical setting, but it doesn't represent Hawaii more or less Hawaiian culture as a whole. But with the insight that Kanaka ʻŌiwi can present to themselves in a storytelling perspective, there's a lot of impact it has to resonate with Native Hawaiians from their personal insight to gain from. Okay. And then with my objectives or to rationalize my research conducted with this developing project, I want the portrayal of Native Hawaiians to be told as authentically or respectfully as much as possible, and balancing between the fun of fantasy genre and the seriousness of Hawaii's history and past. When I say the fun of fantasy genre, I wanted to utilize my personal project of mine titled Project Lua'i. And I actually created this back in a screenwriting course that I took 3 years ago, which is actually the year that I transferred to West Oahu. And this is supposed to showcase a piece of Hawaii's past and present with a fun fantasy twist. My story stands out among other entertainment mediums is that the overview is that my narrative is telling that different people in Hawaii has these powers that's passed down from as old as the time of like the first gods and goddesses or deities. And my original character, Lua'i, she is the descendant and elemental holder of Tutupele. And with that, with the help of her mentor, she'll relive the different historical events of Hawaii's past to learn more and more about her heritage. And then through this, not just with the authenticity, but it's also understanding medium and authenticity. So the exposure to misrepresentation through forms of media, whether it's movies, video games, and even outside those entertainment instances, for example, let's say hula and how often it's used to have like the grass skirts, the coconut bras, and these instances do more harm than good, as this does not reflect Hawaiian culture as a whole, and there's more to it. But with this project, I hope that it will resonate with others, as my main takeaway is to have this representation of Native Hawaiian culture and its people to the readers. And with my feedback, I've actually contacted different community members for their help and their perspective on things, um, along with one of my professors that I asked back in the middle of this semester for aid in my capstone project. And then as for my capstone plans, my plan to deliver that after learning about my objectives is that my capstone project is to develop a pilot screenplay, taking the key points from my personal project as if it was an actual show pitch. Initially, I wanted to do 30 to 35 pages long, as that's the average length of like a 30-minute screenplay, but to kind of have this space to um represent culture, I wanted to aim for at least 45 to 50 pages long. And this will give spotlight in a to a different and unique way of how Hawaii is more than just this tropical paradise. How does this direction appropriate the research I've conducted? Well, with the development and feedback gained for the script, the curation of the screenplay will grow and improve over time. And in the end, the final script will be a product that reflects and resonates with those of Native Hawaiian descent, and not just them, but to those who want to learn more about Hawaii through this entertaining way. Okay. And then we'll start off with the significance. So, my first one that I wanted to address is the commodity of Hawaiian culture over authenticity of Hawaii. So, the first one will be that our culture is often met with a lack of respect. And this isn't just portrayed in media and entertainment. So, with the culture and traditional practices that Hawaii has learned about or has passed on to generation, there's this disrespect and disregard from a foreigner's perspective to our culture and how it's always used to oversell the idealistic setting of Hawaiian culture when that's not at all what Hawaii is all about. And then it kind of leads into my next point with the appropriation of the Hawaiian culture. And again, hula, with how much it's overutilized to promote Hawaii and this paradise, it equivalates to the tourism industry that either if it's like something seen on social media or something in like the television industry, it has this one focus point of overselling this paradise to Hawaii. But in the film industry, some, if not most, mediums that is created, it isn't necessarily curated by Pacific Islanders, let alone Native Hawaiians. And I wanted to mention the Chief of War project or TV series that has portrayed this form of authenticity, and that from the main creator, I think his name is Thomas Sibbett, how he had different practitioners and historians to come onto this project to have this secondhand opinion or perspective where this is how things are supposed to be. And they actually got quite a few people in their respective fields, whether it's from kapa making, weapons, or even like tribal tattoos to signify like the different meanings behind it and what it represents. And then this is my data that I have for how it addresses that most Asian Pacific Islander consumers would spend more time or money on different API authentic films, especially to this next generation. Okay. And then moving on to my next significance is how there are a lack of Hawaiians in Hawaii setting shows. And there are various shows or movies that displays Hawaii, but with no Native Hawaiians. And what I mean by that is that almost multiple projects, there are no Pacific Islanders casted as leads in these projects, and how often they're made or created by non-natives. So, for example, with Dugi Kamealoha, it's this reboot that Disney has put out where it's again it's in Hawaii, but the main character is Native Hawaiian with a Hawaiian name, but the main actress that leads the project is not of Hawaiian descent. And when I say often led by non-natives, like for example, The Descendants with George Clooney, it has the again the all white cast led story, and how it's not there's nowhere in like production where it's I think there's non-Pacific Islanders that worked on this project. But then it's not just that, but also the marginalization of Hawaii and Hawaiians. And Hawaii Five-O is an example to this, where again, the cast, there's no Native Hawaiians or Pacific Islanders. And even if it's like a subplot or the main plot of the episode, it's often portrayed that Pacific Islanders are these ruffian gang type members who is associated with drug dealing, and it creates this limelight on Pacific Islanders that it reflects poorly on how they act in the show versus how in real life how we would act on a court. And this also goes back with the lack of Hawaiians and Hawaii project-based stories, how it still portrays the visitor's paradise versus the native's paradise. So when visitors would come off and especially working in like the retail industry, the visitors would see this as a such a tranquil, peaceful paradise with the coconut water sipping by the sand, the hula dancers, but that's just one half of it. Through a native's perspective and insight to write stories, they have the advantage to tell like different aspects that's in like situations of Hawaii, whether it's like the homeless crisis or the unaffordable housing and the over promotional on tourism. There are these different storytellings that could be based around those things to bring awareness to it, but instead they would choose the more idealistic part and just showcase that. And then I actually have this stat of finding for back in between 2007 to 2019, out of the 44 films, there are only 21 films that had Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islanders lead or co-lead the project. And then for my target audience, this project would be dedicated to Kanaka ʻŌiwi or the kupuna, but it isn't just for that, but also to those who want to learn more about the history and past for the story of Hawaii. And this project serves as a love letter to give back to the community and an homage to my roots. So this would be like for teens or young adults that is curious and want to learn more, or they might have learned something from like the Kamehameha explorations, as they are extensive with learning about like the different pastimes and the history of Hawaii. But then also for the kupuna who have their own experience with their different times that they've lived in, to gain like this feedback or their perspective on things. But then even if it's like not feedback or anything, it still would be to those to foreigners or hales who are interested in learning about Hawaiian culture. Through through a proposed solution, this screenplay, I believe that it will be a good form of representation and an act as inspiration to those in storytelling community, especially those of Native Hawaiian descent. And it in this like setting, especially with like narrative telling, there are those more often than not that Native Hawaiians could gravitate to, especially in creative writing. And I was actually spoke with a author who's based here. And when I shared her this project of mine, she was saying that much to how I believe that each person, especially for Native Hawaiian, they have their own story to tell and different ways of this would draw inspiration to bring to the table to represent Hawaii. For my process and preparation for pre-production, it's going to be about planning out the script and its plot flow. So it'll include like an act one, act two, then act three. But then in the meantime, I'll also refer to other pilot examples or other script examples just to kind of get a feel of how the format and layout would be for the script. And then I'll also research different historical events and what to specifically write about. And after that, I'll draft a play-by-play of what the script will cover just to kind of follow that skeleton to create the script. For production, it's going to be about script development and feedback. So as I'll work on the scripts, I'll block out different days of the or different weeks to set aside time to focus on each different act. And after the completion, I'll send it out for feedback and reviews to the professor I asked aid on and to the different community members that I'm in contact with. And from those, I'll revise the script with the provided feedback. And then moving on to post production, which will be the script distribution. So after it's all finalized and I'll provide the last minute revisals, I'll submit the final product to my capstone professor. And then along with that, I'll share the final product to those who helped with it firsthand. And afterwards, I'll share the final script through a website and for anyone and everyone to read through it for themselves. Then lastly, as a deliverable with the final script and tale, it is ultimately about having this representation of Hawaii and its people. In the entertainment industry, there was no proper showcasing of Hawaii and how, because of this improper showcasing, the islands, not just like for Oahu, it heavily reflects back on the world as they have seen through media what Hawaii is allegedly like, but it also reflects back on with ultimately through the progression of commodity over the culture. And with the capstone's development cycle and multiple revisals, this project will be a story that reflects Hawaii with much love and respect and giving the spotlight to a part of history that others might not be aware of. Okay. So thank you for your time. Does anyone have any questions?